Okay, so we have started the recording and here we go for our May/June quality talk. As a reminder, this recording will be available afterwards on our YouTube channel, hopefully within the next couple of days, if you want to rewatch some part of it or share it with somebody that you know. And speaking of social media, you can find the KWSQA on both LinkedIn and Twitter as well. So if you want to follow along for all the latest updates. So yeah, welcome to this quality talk. It's actually going to be our last quality talk for a couple of months. So good to see you all out here today. As always, I will thank the other members of the KWSQA board for their continued efforts to keep this organization moving and helping to organize all these meetings, even though my face is usually the only one that you see on the day of. And also thanks to D2L, who is continuing to sort of sponsor our Zoom usage here for these meetings. Speaking of acknowledgements, we would also like to remind everyone that the KWSQA head office is located on the Haldeman Tract. This is land that was promised to the Haudenosaunee people of the Six Nations of the Grand River. It's also within the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. And as always, we just want to say that we feel very privileged to be able to live and work and build our software quality community in such a great region. Also a reminder about our code of conduct. So you can find the full details of this on our website if you're interested. And if you have any questions at all or need to report anything, we are more than happy to take your feedback and questions at info@kwsqa.org, or you can message a board member directly. But the code of conduct applies to both our virtual settings and our in-person settings. If you haven't been to our website lately, there are some fun things you can do there. I'll just highlight a couple of those quickly. We're always taking submissions for quality talk proposals. So if you'd like to speak at a meeting like this, we recently closed the call for proposals for targeting quality. More on that shortly, but you can still go there and find the latest information about the upcoming conference. You can also submit a proposal if your company is interested in working with us on a testing games event. You can also purchase a membership for this season, and why you might do that would be if you just want to show your support for our organization, or if you are interested in voting in the next KWSQA election, which takes place at the end of this year. If you are located sort of within our general region, then you would also, and you're a member, then you're eligible to vote. You can also sign up for our mailing list if social media is not as much your thing and you'd prefer to receive updates from us through email. So speaking of the conference, we're still saying tentatively scheduled for September 26th and 27th at the Cambridge Hotel. We are hoping to make that a more firm decision in the very short term, so stay tuned for information on that. And as I just mentioned, our call for proposals has closed in the last couple of days, so we'll be reviewing all the submissions and hopefully putting together another great lineup of speakers, workshops, and presentations. For the summer, as I mentioned, we're taking a little bit of a break from the Quality Talk series. So we're hoping to still do a social event later this month, though, somewhere on a patio. Still sorting out exactly the location for that, but stay tuned, we'll let you know. For July and August, we are planning to take a summer break to hopefully just be focused on planning the conference. And then in September, there wouldn't be a quality talk either. We would just hope to see you at Targeting Quality. Reminder that if you fill out the feedback survey that you'll receive at the end of this talk, we will enter you in a draw to win a $50 Amazon gift card to be awarded at this year's AGM, which takes place at the end of the year. We do really appreciate your feedback that you have about these meetings. We read all of it and try to act on as much of it as we can. So thank you to those of you who consistently send us your thoughts after the meetings. We really do love to hear from you. Okay, so the good stuff. Today's presentation, we have Ian with us. He's going to share some interesting thoughts about leading from quality. Ian's been a fairly regular participant, I guess, at our quality talks in the past. We were just reminiscing a little bit about the old days when we got to do these in person and how that was different from the virtual series that we've had more recently. Anyway, Ian was just saying that he's so excited to be able to present at this series that he has been following for a long time now. And we're very excited to have you. And thanks for coming, Ian. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Tina. And thank you very much, everybody, for joining. I know it's lunchtime, so appreciate folks taking time out of their day to listen to me ramble on about various topics. So always love to hear from people on this stuff. And I honestly could talk about these kind of subjects all day anyway. So I think I do. So why don't I get started? I'm going to share my screen. And so let me get started with a little bit of preamble. So my name is Ian Howlett. I'm the Director of Engineering at Innisphere. Innisphere is a consulting organization based in Guelph, Ontario. It's been operating for 25 years as of this year. We're actually having our 25th anniversary celebration later this month, so it's very exciting. I joined in January of 2020, so I had a full 2 months in an office right before I didn't. We made a big pivot when the pandemic hit to being a fully remote organization, which has been an interesting journey on its own. So when I joined I joined as a manager for testing, and my focus has generally been around guiding our kind of primary client towards a more modern test engineering mindset comparatively to in times past when a lot of their approach to testing was very much, well, let's just throw bodies at the problem and figure it out. So it's been a big journey, and I've had an awesome team to work with. It's been a great place for me. And recently got promoted to Director of Engineering. I'm taking on a bigger scope of work. So that's a little bit about what I do now. In the past, I worked at CIBC. I worked there for 10 years. That's where I started my career. I was actually a developer when I started, and then kind of ended up in the quality space in capital markets technology. And after that, in between Innisphere and a bank, I worked at Roadmonk, which is a local, well, it was a startup, scale up, whatever stage things would be in now. I was employee number 22, I think. And I was the first manager they hired. And the idea there was to establish a quality practice when I started there. And then that company scaled up quickly. And so my job changed a lot. So I've had a lot of experience in big organizations, in small organizations, and kind of in the middle. And I've had to do a lot around quality. And I've had a lot of time to think about, how lucky I've been to have an opportunity to be a leader in a quality space and have a strong voice with clients that I've worked with now at Innisphere and across my career. And I wanted to share a little bit about some of the things that I've learned, some of the experiences I've had, and just different insights that I think would be valuable for people to hear. And hopefully I can give you some tools and some takeaways that you can use in your own work that you do. So I want to set some expectations. So before I start my little soapbox, I want everyone to get an idea on what you should expect and what you shouldn't expect. And also want to set, so if you have a question, there's a chat I think you can ask questions in. I'm going to try and get to the end because my brain works in such a way that if that train of thought is derailed, it may never get back on the tracks, and that would be a disaster for everybody. So I will make sure there's time at the end to ask questions as well. So first off, the things I'm relaying here today coming from my own experience in the industry. It's not always right. It's not likely to be a one-size-fits-all solution to the problems that you may be facing in your teams or organizations. I'm not saying like, this is the way, do this and you will lead and everything will be great. So these are my own personal white papers, effectively, experiences that I've had in my career, experiences that I've had in, sometimes in the same role with various kind of responsibilities. And that comes with some caveats, obviously. This worked for me. It may not work for you, but here's how I did it and here's what I learned from it. I'm going to be discussing some of the strategies that I've used, ones that worked and ones that really didn't, as well as skills and resources that I've found particularly useful throughout my career so far. So that's the kind of stuff that I want to discuss. Also, there seems to be a lot of animated GIFs of cats that sneak into my presentation, whether I want them to or not. So like they just kind of, okay, see, okay, I didn't, okay, you know what, that's enough for one presentation, okay. So what does it mean to lead from quality? What do I mean by leading from quality? Generally, this means my audience are folks that are coming from traditionally the far end of the software development lifecycle. So QA teams, test teams, quality enablement, test engineering, SDETs, cat herders, or whatever fun name or new names that the industry is giving it for people what test things and are being given what names they give themselves for those things as well. Organizations are hungry for organizational quality. There's a growing recognition that this isn't just a function of manual or automated testing practices, but it's a look at how we can apply the continuous improvement lens at all functions of a business. So the skill set involving curiosity and organization and attention to detail that testers have would really indicate we're well placed to have a lot of influence here. And if we can apply those skill sets along with a few other things, you can make a big impact on the organization. So this is for you in the QA teams. Maybe you don't have the authority or full say in what gets done in your organizations, but your skills and insights combined with a strong communication and analytical skill set means that you can have an impact, and your organizations probably need it. So everyone has likely heard the term shift left bandied about from various circles. It can be used as a cudgel to increase accountability for failures in quality practices across organizations. So testing teams are like, well, we have to shift left, so you're responsible for making sure all the stuff is quality everywhere. But really what it's supposed to be is the term to solidify and guide the idea of ownership of quality. Whenever I have run a workshop for a team and asked the question, who owns quality? The answer I'm expecting is everyone. And honestly, no one ever gets it wrong. Even the people that I know don't believe that or don't really understand what it means, everyone knows the answer. And it's usually like, okay, if I say this thing, you'll nod and know that I know what I'm talking about. So people know in engineering organizations, that's the answer they need to say now. But what it looks like in practice is still unclear across most organizations that I've worked with. One of the elements that I found is key in driving shifting is leadership for quality left. So if you have strong voices, senior leaders, or eager folks who want to make things better, you should try and get those voices into your processes earlier rather than later. If you want to shift quality left, you have to ensure folks who have motivations that are aligned from quality are at the strategic level, not just the tactical level. You need to have that built into your plan. So shifting left from a lead from quality standpoint isn't just about automation or having more meetings with testers early in the process. It's about making sure your leadership has that mindset built in as well. You may have heard of Conway's Law, probably heard it referenced before, which is the idea that systems that organizations design will reflect the way the organization itself is structured. So in most organizations, testing is a function of engineering. While you do have organizations that have QA managers, it is certainly becoming less frequent that I see this, and teams are moving to the idea that testers are developers with different skill sets or general focus. And a lot of that harkens back to the functions of Scrum and the idea of having, multidisciplinary team members and teams, where there's just the dev team, which encompasses every skill set that the team needs to get things done. It does pose a problem. In my past, I've seen that product teams take more of an approach of hiring design directors to give design its own seat at the leadership table alongside product teams. So if they want to bolster a design organization principle in practice, they'll do that. But rarely have I seen quality directors brought up to drive towards quality organizational design. So that might be a byproduct of quality being everyone's responsibility. So if it's everyone's problem, it's no one's problem. Either way, there's a different focus between delivery and quality. There's a push and pull. Some leaders coming from the delivery space are brilliant at finding that balance, and others not so much, and need the help to drive it. So about 100 years ago, okay, it was like 6 years ago, but at this point, time is a flat circle. It might as well be the same thing. I was having lunch with a test engineer at Google and trying to get some insight into what their day-to-day really looked like. I was really interested in what the difference is. At the time I was working at the bank, which had a very specific structure. And one of the things that struck me at the time, and this is before I had experience with product-led organizations, was the concept that their role was aligned to quality in the same way that a product manager is aligned to value. They're both customer-focused, ensuring the customer is getting the best experience when change is delivered, but their primary focus was shifted slightly, and that made their way they approach the role different, but ultimately they're in service of the same thing, being the voice of the customer. The product manager is ensuring the backlog is aligned against value, and the test engineer is ensured that that valuable item that the team has decided needs to get done is delivered at the best possible quality to the customer at the end of the day. So I've had team members on my testing teams provide amazing insight into customer mindset and experience during the development process. And when teams are open to hearing that feedback, it can be transformative. So you want to drive quality now from your role in the organization. Now, what do you do? Well, what's your situation look like? Obviously, there's a lot of nuance here, but I have generally boiled down most situations in what I call the 3 B's. Ha 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 ha. So we have bartering quality, building quality, and bolstering quality. So are you meeting with a group or individual who does not see the value in what you're doing or taking a very strong what's in it for me approach? Then you're going to be bartering quality. Your audience here is not enthusiastic about change and does not recognize there is a problem. If you're walking into a situation where you're the first, or maybe the first with really any influence on quality or testing in an organization, and you don't have process or people to start with, you'll be building quality. Here you'll be finding an audience that is enthusiastic about change, but does not recognize there's a problem. And that's why you're here. If your aim is to make a marketed improvement to an existing team with an established process and culture and assumptions, then you'll be looking to bolster quality. And this is a group that generally recognizes there's a problem, but isn't always enthusiastic about the change. Okay, now it's empathy time. You need to understand your situation a bit. Now you kind of recognize the situation you're in. Maybe you have your audience pinned down. So you need to put yourself in their shoes for a bit now and help you understand what they're thinking when you stroll up and start talking about CI/CD this and exploratory that, and you watch the color drain from their face and just staring into the middle distance. What do they need? If they don't have any needs, then you won't be able to give them the core of the golden circle, which is why. Why are you here? What are you proposing to do? If they don't know they need it, this is where you get to introduce the problem. What are they concerned about? If they know they need change, there is often a fear in driving it. If they don't know they need to change, what is going to be their primary opposition to it and what you're coming forward with, and what are you going to do to mitigate it? So the other thing is, how is this person or group measured when it comes to success? What does success look like to them? Could be customer acquisition, speed revenue, could be net promoter score. This is going to be big in helping figure out how you can align your needs and drive home to find the right metric to demonstrate your success. If you know what they need to be successful, it'll allow you to help yourself be more successful as well. And ultimately, if you propose change to an organization, what are the risks that could be realized if they decide to go ahead and if they decide to not? How will you mitigate those risks? you may have to go down this list for any compromises on the vision here. So if they're going to say, no, we can't possibly do this, and here's the reasons why, and they're valid concerns, well, here's what that looks like if we don't do this. And it might not be the ideal solution, but it might be the best solution that you can offer. So going in with an all or nothing approach and not having mitigations to those is usually going to stand you in bad stead. So I'm going to get into a few examples now to illustrate a situation in which I had to barter for quality. So in my time working capital markets, I was in this case, I was a senior manager for technical processes, practices, automation for capital markets technology, which is a fun long title because bankers love long titles. I can definitely tell you one of the biggest driving force on that team is revenue and speed. Every missed opportunity was potentially thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of dollars that you were leaving on the table. Decisions need to be made quickly and efficiently, and you needed to have data and confidence to back it up. In this case, I have an established team that are experts in automation and process improvement, small but mighty. We had 3 full-time employees at the beginning of this particular project, and an army of contractors that were funded by various projects across the organization. So this is a weird funding thing. Anyway, as new projects are spinning up around a not so legacy application, my team identified that they were spending an inordinate amount of time on manual checklist-driven testing from a large number of offshore resources. Regression issues were common, so there was a lot of sprinting toward the end of the project, lots of overtime, and lots of finger pointing. We identified a massive opportunity for automation where it really made sense, but the work required was going to be extensive due to the size of the project and the complexity of the application, and also the underlying business logic. It was a lot of finance heavy stuff happening, and I wasn't staffed with a team of CPAs. So when I approached the head of the business to talk through this need, the first response was, so I came up and said, hey, this is a big opportunity, blah, 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 blah. And the response I got back was, we already pay a lot of money for engineering. I don't see why we have to pay any more. Let's just get it done with what we have. So the team was already stretched thin. The resources they had were not familiar with the technologies that we would need to implement. So we went back to the team to understand what the impact was on the team whenever a critical issue was discovered during regression, which kind of introduced me to the term burn rate, which is a really fun little thing I learned for, happening to sell stuff. Burn rate is basically, if work doesn't happen for a team, how much does it cost? What's your hourly cost if nothing is happening, if everything comes to a standstill? So this was a really interesting tool, especially when people are very money focused, because if you realize there was 120 people working on a project, and every time dev went down, that 120 people literally couldn't do work. For every 2 hours, I could say, well, this is going to cost us, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they could realize it was having a financial impact on not having that implemented, that stability, and catching those issues earlier in the pipeline. So burn rate was a great one for me to learn there. The other thing I had to learn was not to rely on the fact that, yes, this should have been part of the original estimates. They should have planned for this. They should have planned for automation. And in some cases it was planned, and in some cases it wasn't. In the cases where it was planned and wasn't done, I tried, throwing that up at the first, like saying, oh, well, this is, this should have been done, this should have been done, and really kind of blew up in my face and in a lot of other people's face, because they recognized they made a mistake. But there was reasons why they weren't able to do it at the time. Either they were put on time pressure, or the resources they had didn't actually understand the technologies, or it wasn't clear what the actual scope was. And throwing blame around really just got people's hackles up and slowed the process down even more. So one of the things we also did was highlighting the work that is being done right now, why it's being prioritized, and what the costs of adding the resources were. So rather than saying, well, you should be doing automation already, it was pointing out what everyone was already working on, and if we added automation to it, what they wouldn't be able to do. And then we also talked about the risk of nothing happening. We could keep doing nothing. This is what it's going to this is what it's going to look like. We're still going to keep having these problems. The execs are still going to be called in these last minute meetings. And we were able to show what the estimated cost savings, I think in this case, it was going to be cost neutral, the project could be. The other thing I learned is know your limits. I could have gone in and said, this is how much money we need, and this is all the resources, and overshot it. but I knew kind of where they were going to land anyway. So I tried to make it in as much as I could. So I couldn't ask for millions, but I could ask for a lot and still make it work. So some of the key learnings that I got from this on my side was burn rate is a good thing for me when I have to barter for quality. Time is money. I can demonstrate how much time is being spent on things like step backs and environments being down and all those things. So I know that that costs money. I learned not to do finger pointing, saying someone should have done this and someone should have done that, or I already said we were going to do this. I said this a long time ago. I told you so. It never really advanced my agenda. Sometimes it made me feel better about myself, but it never really helped. Highlighting risks and mitigations were good. It gave me backup plans. It gave me more ammunition when I was talking to companies about, okay, we can do this. And in a lot of places, testing is really about identifying risk and letting the whole team decide if it's a risk they're willing to take on. And it's just bringing that into the leadership level. And then talking about long-term investments. I wasn't just looking at, well, it's going to cost you this much now, but this is what it looks like in 5 years if we invest this now, because if we're released, we're spending this much time just spinning, we'll save money in the long term. And all those things were things that I really learned very well during that experience. I can say the whole process of me realizing there was a problem or being told there was a problem and actually getting the funding for this was 1.5 years. So I'll tell you how banks are. It's a fun project. And if you take me out for a drink sometime, I'll tell you a lot more details. Okay, so this story is actually about my very first opportunity as a manager in tech. So here's a department with literally no testers, not one. The current PM, project manager in this case, not product manager, is the one running all the test environments, and he hates it, just despises the job, doesn't like it at all. Nothing is automated. It's all vendor applications that are complete black boxes. They run on Unix systems and languages that like 12 people on the whole planet know. Complex financial instruments that you have to deal with. And I'm someone, I can barely keep my bank account balance. So like, I don't know money. I worked at a bank for 10 years, but I still know nothing about money. And yeah, good luck, have fun, enjoy. So I can tell you the first thing I really wanted to do was identify quick wins right away. I had the advantage of like, I have a development background, so I got to look at some automation opportunities, and just finding a quick win right off the jump gave me a really good indication on like, I can free up this much of my time. So it was taking them like 3 days to spin up a test environment just because of the complexity of all these systems. And it was all Unix scripts and this kind of stuff. And I'm like, well, I know how to automate all this stuff. So I did. And turning that into a 2-hour process instead of a 3-day process gave me a lot more time to focus on other things that need to get done. The other thing I really had to do here was integrate and listen to the teams from a sociological standpoint and be careful not to get swept up in it. It's easy to get pulled into the culture of things and, you know, oh, this is just how it is. There's a really good book I read called The First 90 Days, which talks about kind of building a plan and executing a plan within the first time you join an organization. And I can tell you from experience, the first 3 months you're there is the time when you can make a significant impact without getting kind of sucked into the, you know, everything else that's going on before you get too swept away. But listening to people and getting a sense of what it was like on the ground, why decisions were made, it was really helpful. And you have to know what you can do with what you have, what you can do next, and then what you need to get there. So I had me. I didn't want to make grand plans and go in and say, well, I need a team of 17 people and this is what we're going to do. I needed to know what I was capable of doing myself, what things I could share with other people, what I was able to accomplish next with the resources I had, and then if I need to get further, what resources I need to get there and what advantages it would have. So it's identifying that you're building step by step, and that's okay. Ultimately, no one knows what they're doing. We're all just figuring it out, and that's okay. You're going to make mistakes, but at least knowing what you can do with what you have instead of like holding up as like, well, if I just hire 2 more people, I'll fix everything. It's not gonna, you need to start building. You need to start actually putting processes in place with the people that you have there. Having a vision is great. So what's your mantra? That should be your drumbeat to keep you moving in the right direction. You can veer You can change your approach, but you shouldn't lose sight of what you're trying to accomplish. So for a long time, mine was like, I'm going to build a culture of quality. I'm going to build a culture of quality in this organization. That's what I'm going to do. Wasn't just about, getting reduced automation. It wasn't just about implementing, better practices for testing or reducing time to delivery. It was like, I'm going to build a culture of quality here. That's not just testing, it's everyone. And so that was my vision, and then trying to get there from that. You won't get it right the first time, probably not the second time. Don't get lost in that fact. Don't get into sunk cost fallacies. You may need to reassess. You may need to fight your assumptions. When I was building something from scratch, having somebody that I could bounce off ideas to, whether it was in my organization or outside, like, it was helpful. So I could look at someone and say, am I completely off base here? Does this make any sense? Because sometimes you won't have the expertise in the organization to know when you're not doing things right. So you need to make sure you're able to bounce that off things. So key learnings from my time building a quality organization, where no one knows what they're doing. Like, no one does. There's books and things you can read, but ultimately we're all figuring it out as we go along, and that's okay. Getting quick wins is great, especially when you're starting in a role. You want to drive out and say, look, I made an impact, and you want to be able to free up some of the time that's like just that tactical firefighting, so that you can actually focus on, and people will, it builds a reputation up very quickly. So I talked about having a vision. Figure out what your mantra is. What are you trying to sell to people? How can you get everyone on board with what you're trying to do as well? And you'll make mistakes, and you'll probably make a lot of mistakes. So I didn't put the animation on this one, so you get my points ahead of time here. So this is for bolstering quality. So this is probably the most diverse and challenging B to find yourself in. It's also the most common. You walk in, or you're already part of an organization that knows there is a problem. They may not be able to place exactly what the problem is, but it's got something to do with quality somewhere. So this is the area that can have the most go wrong quickly, and it's the hardest to turn around. Planning, listening, and understanding is key here. Listen, 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 listen. I'm living this right now with a client on a project. I'm generally living this if I'm working, so it's not hard to reference everything going on there, but let me just try and draw from some previous experiences. If you're coming in from an organization where you already have influence and or authority and have a deeper understanding of the problem, you're already in with a start. For those that are just coming in or just getting familiar, making sure you drive ahead with that empathy engine is going to be important. Established processes and idiosyncratic problems will likely have been done on purpose or for reason, and making sure you understand the history can often lead to better understanding of how to avoid pitfalls. So some of your ideas may also have been attempted before or failed. I have made the mistake of thinking, oh, surely everyone's done this wrong before, but I will be the one to get this right. And when I attempted to implement the same thing, I ran into headfirst into the same problems that the teams warned me about. It took the wind completely out of my sails. So once you've identified the areas of improvement, and maybe you've mapped out the processes and areas where the bottlenecks are, that's when the real fun part comes. It's finding the metrics that can demonstrate success. It's the part that I hate the most, and most of the people I know hate the most, because metrics can be very dangerous, especially when you're dealing with something kind of amorphous in an organization as what is quality. So quality can be subjective. So understanding what quality means to the stakeholders and what their objectives are can help you find the right metrics. So maybe customers are finding too many defects in production, so you can use escape defects. That could be a good measure for that. Maybe they're finding a lot of non-critical issues, but it's causing a lot of churn and you're getting a lot of customer feedback that's not necessary. So doing a deeper dive on severity and how to triage with weight pushed, depending on the severity, that could be the thing to do. In the past project, I had a team that was very concerned with velocity, not uncommon. The perception was QA was a big bottleneck and was holding up the show. Everything took too long. Developers were constantly waiting for testing, and they still had defects in production regularly. After a meeting with the team, so engineering, product, sales, everyone, I sat with the team I had the most authority with, which is the test team, and realized they were spending 5 days out of every 10-day sprint running regression manually and catching things a lot. So that was the first metric to move, go from 5 days to 1 day and then to 0 days. It took additional resources, moving to a risk-based testing framework and collaborating with product and developers to find the highest problem areas to focus on. But we got to 1 day fairly quickly. Getting to 0 was harder, mostly because I actually found myself unable to let go of the little safety net. It was a kind of point of pride that we were able to run regressions so quickly, but we were finding no bugs. So were we actually spending our time valuably? And could we figure out a better way to do that? Could we just kind of push a lot of that accountability earlier? So that was my own assumption on what the team needed that I needed to actually challenge a bit more. But anyway, that's a different story. So now we freed up a lot of time for folks and things were still bottlenecked, but at least we weren't getting worse. And so then it was taking a deep dive into where those bottlenecks were coming from. Okay, so where are we spending the most time now here? And the more I dug into that, the more I got a better indication. Oh, actually, we're spending a lot of time because of these setbacks. So like defects that are found in the stories that are fairly obvious. And sometimes that was at testing and sometimes that was at code review. And so then we're like, okay, we're going to measure how many times we find a critical path bug. So like what I would call a severity 1. So it's on a critical use case and there is no workaround. So it's just blocking. How many of those bugs were found after something had been sent and to code review? And so those are the metrics that we were able to track, and we were able to see the average time things were spending in the different phase. We had moved to Jira by this point, so we were able to track more of the details. And like, oh, we're spending a whole lot of time in a code review. We're spending a whole lot of time waiting for code review. We're spending a whole lot of time waiting for testing before we get into testing. Does that mean we need resources? What's happening here? So starting to look at those numbers and realize that there were different problems to tackle was important. The other thing I had to do in a lot of these cases is you have to pick your battles, because there's a lot that you can choose from. If someone says, well, how do we make quality work in our organization? What can we do to make things faster? There's probably 100 different solutions here. You're going to have different opportunities to influence, and picking the easier ones is sometimes good. Picking the hardest one that makes the biggest impact is probably good, but you can't do all of them. And sometimes you will run into brick walls of people, process, or culture things, trying to identify when those things are running up against you, when you're spending too much time on something that you could be spending on something else, and pivoting is important too. So picking your battles is really key, because when you're bolstering quality, there's a lot of already moving parts. You're trying to change the tracks in front of a moving train. You're trying to change the wheels on a car that's already in motion. And that's going to be the most challenging component there. So I wanted to highlight now a bit of the things I think folks in the testing practice can focus on more to help influence more change in their organizations. Ultimately, these are things that I am always building on. I would never say I've mastered, but I'm learning to develop them over time. And learning to develop them over time has allowed me to stand on firm ground, and as I've been on my own journey to make quality things happen. So communication. So communication isn't the art of persuasion that I'm talking about here, although that is an element of it. The big part here is being able to communicate your ideas to a variety of different audiences effectively. The way you talk about quality to a dev and to a product manager and to an executive versus a colleague is different. The ideas may be the same, but how you tailor those talks are important. When making this presentation, I'm having to be conscious that there are people from my team here, hello, from previous places I've worked with, hello, and this is going to be going up on the internet forever. So I still want to be in clear, but I want to be clear on who my audiences are and who I'm actually going to be talking about. And I'm assuming I don't have to go into a lot of technical details on test stuff, because I'm not the authority on all those things, and that's a different talk altogether. Communication is about how you collect and organize your information and present it to your audience. It's deciding if that needs to be a presentation or an email or an @channel Slack message. It's public speaking, but it's also one-to-one conversations. For me, it's also inserting occasional jokes into slides to keep it lighthearted. And also that's just a demonstration that I don't ever want to take myself that seriously. So influencing without authority. This is what I call Jedi mind tricks. It can sound a bit like fooling people sometimes, but really it's just a combination of leveraging what you know about the people, the organization, your goals, and figuring out how to achieve them even when you're not the one calling the shots. It's remembering key things like who is the person that actually is going to make the decision here, and who are the people that are going to be the most resistant to this change, and how do I actually make sure I can get them on board, or at least people that influence them on board. So you're not always going to be the one to say this has to happen, but you want to be able to find out who those people are, or the kind of cultural momentum you'll need in order to allow change to happen. Influencing that authority is a big part of change management. You don't want to walk into a group of people and say, you have to do this, because you might at best get compliance, but you want people to actually believe in it. You want them to understand the why, and you want them to be passionate about joining you on the journey. And that's where the influencing part comes into it. So it's about getting to the right answer. It's not about being right. So it can also be about like taking in feedback, or if someone with authority has the right idea and you've already mentioned it before and they suddenly get all the credit for it, that can be a big bummer, but ultimately you got your goal and you'll get your win. And the folks around you have likely recognized your contribution there, and that does matter. This is especially important in consulting. A lot of, a role of mine have been making sure I'm sitting with people and talking to them, and over a period of time, getting them to understand my way of thinking, so that when they come up with the idea that I have been incepting into their mind over the last 3 months, I can be like, that's a great idea. We should absolutely do that. So yes, that is a key part of this as well. I took a course on influencing without authority in my first year at the bank, and I still refer back to it in my head. A lot of the tips and tricks I've talked about as I've gone through this presentation are in there, so it's not like I'm hiding the skills from you. It's a lot of things that I've already talked about that are kind of key elements to this. So technical knowledge. This is obviously quite broad, but I found a lot of leaders can start to downplay this as they progress in their careers. I also find a lot of testers downplay their overall technical knowledge, or potentially focus on the wrong things when looking at these opportunities in leadership. Knowing the intricacies of how to implement an automation framework in Cypress, Selenium, Robot Framework, and others is great to the tactical element of things. But it also helps to understand why you choose those frameworks over the others, what limitations they have, and what experience you've had and what's gone wrong when doing those things as well. Having a broad knowledge of tools, frameworks, practices, emerging technologies will give you a leg up and give you a different air of authority. If you're talking to someone on the dev side and you understand a bit more about the dev practices and you can speak to them on those terms, it will help you have those conversations better. And the same goes for product stuff. Having a good discussion about what the customer is seeing, is that technical knowledge? Depends how technical your product is. If you have to understand it, or if there's some intricacies to it to understand the customer, it can help you better work with that team on that level. So like, I wasn't familiar with the term chaos engineering until sometime shortly after the pandemic. It came up in a client meeting and I heard the term and I was like, that sounds like a thing. Whoops, I need to immediately learn as much about this as possible so that I can at least have a surface level discussion with someone, and then I continued to learn over time. A lot of what I learned is that executives in the organization I was working with at the time really wanted it, and that was great. And we weren't even close to being prepared to actually do the best practices around that, which is good to know as well. When I was charged with first figuring out how to shepherd agile processes into a waterfall part of an organization, I got certified Scrum Master and product owner to give me a broader spectrum of understanding so that I could help understand the theoretical and practical components of the implementation of Scrum. And really, it was a way for me to be a bit hoity-toity about, well, we're not doing this properly, and this is how it actually would be in the Scrum guide and stuff like that. But that was also fun, but that's just fun for me. So my key thing here is keep learning, don't stop. There will be disruptive new tech that you may think is a fad, and yes, it often is, but it's good to be aware of the buzzwords in those technologies, because they can and will be used against you. And the more you can understand and head those things off, the better you'll be able to have that influence you need. If someone brings up a new tech, like this will solve all our problems, and you've known about this in the back of your head and you understand, actually, no, there's a limitation here. This isn't going to work for us. Maybe they'll still say we need to investigate, and that's great, but at least you already have that base understanding and they know that you're keeping an eye on those things. You'll get sidelined 100 times. Someone will come up with like, well, have we tried this? And it's a thing you've never heard of, but you know, this person may have a friend that told them about it, and then you have to go now investigate this open source technology that like 6 people use, but is going to fix everything. That will still happen. But having a broad technical knowledge, as well as your in-depth knowledge that you carry with you from all the work that you've done, is going to stand you in good stead, and it shouldn't be discounted. I wanted to give a few bit of reference material for folks. This is a couple books that kind of really encompass some of the things I've talked about and how to really drive a lot of leadership things. So Leading Quality, which is funny because given that I already had the topic and ideas I was going to talk about here, I hadn't read this book until I was on the flight back from my trip on Sunday, and it is good. There's lots of stuff in there I think that is very applicable to the stuff that I've talked about today. I would very much recommend it, and it's very short. It took me a couple hours, so would very much recommend Leading Quality. Some of the practices I talked up are also in things like the Lean Startup, and I did mention the Golden Circle and Starting with Why. I think that's a great book to read as kind of a principle on, you know, how to have discussions about purpose in an organization and how to drive your own mantra and vision ahead and how to make people really kind of buy into those things a little bit more. So some reading material for you if you like those kind of things. There's a whole lot of other books I can recommend. I got a shelf full of them here, and yeah, and I do enjoy reading about this kind of stuff. So any questions? If you don't want to ask here, you can always reach out via email and also connect on LinkedIn. I went over a bunch of stuff very quickly, so there's a lot of topics there, but I wanted to open up for questions. Just gonna end my sharing actually while I'm here. No questions means that everything I said was perfectly clear and all of you have everything you need now to do what you need to do. And I'm very excited to hear that. In the meantime, like I said, if you have anything you wanted to ask, anything more around any of these subjects, you can reach me via my email, which I put on the screen. And again, I'm always happy to reach out on LinkedIn, talk about more about Innosphere or any of the projects you've worked on. There's a lot of fun stuff happening on our team. And I always love talking about these kind of quality topics with people. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Ian, for sharing that with us today. So we also do have our feedback survey. So if you want to provide feedback on the chat today, there's going to be an email later, or you can go to this form and we'll make sure that Ian gets that as well. So thank you again, and hope everybody has a great afternoon.
Thanks again, everyone, for coming. And thanks for having me, KWSQA. Yeah, KWSQA team. Tongue's gone numb now.
Thank you.